Okay. Yesterday we learned Daf Yutes. The Gemara was speaking about the order of how things were done. The main machloikis that was discussed yesterday was what comes first. Is it the akravas hamincha that comes first, or is it the drinking that comes first, which is followed by the akravas hamincha? The Tanakama said that first the drinking happens, then you're makriv of the mincha, while Rab Shimon said it was the opposite. Yet Rab Shimon interjects that if you did it wrongfully and you drank first and then brought the mincha, it would work anyway. The Gemara ended up saying that the whole shaila here, and it turns out being a three machloikis because there was a Rabbi Kiva involved, hinges on how you interpret the three psukim that talk about the drinking. So before the Torah mentions the mincha, the Torah says v'hishka. After the Torah mentions the mincha, the Torah says v'achar yashke. After all this, then you drink, which would be mashma, that first you bring the mincha and then you drink. So the first hishka, which is mentioned before the Torah lists the process of the mincha, would indicate that she drinks first. But right after the pasuk says the details of the mincha, the Torah says sticks in the achagach yashkes isha. So that seems to indicate that the drinking is after the mincha. So there are sort of contradictory mashmoyisim. That's really the core of the machloikis. Reb Shimon focuses on the words the achar yashkes isha, which clearly states a chronology that first comes the mincha, then comes the drinking. While the Tanakama, but according to Reb Shimon, so why did the Torah say v'hishka even before the Torah started to discuss the mincha? It must be to tell us, Zok Reb Shimon, that if by mistake you wrongfully drank, it will still work if afterwards they bring the mincha. The Chum said it doesn't make sense that the very first time that the Torah introduces the word v'hishka, it's speaking about a b'di'evid. It's more logical to state that first the Torah tells us what needs to be done if everything should be done properly. Then the Torah can deal with what ifs. So therefore, the first v'hishka is dafka, and therefore you drink before you bring the mincha. And the v'achar yashkes isha is referring to other prerequisites that have to occur before they drink. And one of them that the Chachamim focus on is that the Megillah has to be completely wiped out. So when they pour the water over the print, over the writing, there can't be any little impression left. It has to be completely done. That's why it says va'achar, after it's completely wiped out. So just a detail in how you wash out the Megillah, but it's not telling you about the order of things, because in fact the v'hishka in the earlier pasuk determines that first you drink and then you bring the mincha. That was the main machlokes. And then there was a third v'hishka. Thank you very much. Thank you. From where we learn, the third v'hishka is from where we learn that once you wipe out the Megillah, at that point you'll already force her to drink it, even if she refuses to drink it. The Gemara also tells us that there's a slight machlokes between Rabbi Kiva and Reb Shimon, and that is that although Reb Shimon says that if b'di eved you first drank and then you brought the mincha, it would work, Rabbi Kiva disagrees with that. Rabbi Kiva says that even b'di eved it would not work. And Rashi told us all the way at the end of the sugi yesterday that Rabbi Kiva doesn't hold that if you did it by mistake, it would work. Therefore, the first v'hishka, he darshins to tell you that you force her. So unlike Rabbi Shimon and the Rabbanan, who use the third v'hishka to say that you force her, Rabbi Kiva does that with the first v'hishka. And therefore he'll say, you'll force her even if it was done improperly. So that's another nafkamina between Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Shimon, is if it's done improperly, do you force her? Rabbi Shimon holds not, and Rabbi Kiva says yes. That was a three-way machlokes. We also had a distinction in Rabbi Kiva between why this woman doesn't want to drink. If she seems very confident that she doesn't want to drink, then we perceive that as a haidah. She's admitting that she became tummy, that's why she doesn't want to drink. But if we see she's trembling and she's terrified and that's why she doesn't want to drink. So let me just take a step back. If she's calm and collected when she says she doesn't want to drink, we take that as a haidah, and therefore we won't force her because we've already got our clarification that she's tamea. But if she's trembling, then we think that maybe she really believes she's tahira, but she's so terrified to drink because she thinks maybe she'll be impacted by the mayim anyway, and she's afraid to drink even though she's tahira. It's under those circumstances that we force her to drink because that's not a beer. And then all the way at the end of the Gemara wanted to ask what happens if she first said calmly, I don't want to drink, and then she changed her mind and said she doesn't want to drink. Would you say that maybe when she originally said she doesn't want to drink, although she looked calm, maybe she was really afraid inside, and really it's not Aidah? And the last thing we learned is don't think that the Mayim HaMa'orim tastes like cream soda or Geshmak Adai Dr. Pepper. Rather, it tastes bitter because they purposely put a bitter taste into it because it was called Mayim HaMa'orim, the bitter water HaMa'orim that then is used to wash out the ksav, which now takes us to the Mishnah Daf Chaf Amud Aleph. Today, by the way, is the yahrzeit of the Titanic. So the English yahrzeit is April 15th, but it was Chaf Zayin Nisan, which is today's date, which was the day the Titanic sank. They were from Eden on the Titanic. And there's a story, a lady by the name of Mrs. Axe, which is AKS, and she had a baby in her hands as they were loading the boats, and I'm sure it was tremendous confusion. People standing on the ship, it's the process of going down, loading lifeboats. So somehow, someone grabbed her baby out of her hand. She had a little baby boy, and threw him into a lifeboat. She ended up in a different lifeboat. So she was beside herself. She lost her son. I guess the next day, once they were safe, the survivors were all together. She sees another woman, a Goyish woman, holding her baby. She recognized her baby. So she went to that woman and said, hey, give me back my baby. And this woman said, no, it's my baby. And a fight ensued as to whose baby this was. So she says, I can prove to you that this is my baby. In Europe in those days, it was unheard of that a child would become mole. They would not circumcise. She says, this child is circumcised. And in fact, through this child's bris, they were able to prove that it was her child, and that's how she got her baby back. His name was Frank Apps, and he actually died, I believe, in 1999. That's the Jewish story, one of the Jewish stories of the Titanic. I guess it wasn't royal, that family. It was a royal family. It's B'nai Avinu. Yeah, the other interesting thing today is the yahrzeit of Rabbi Victor Miller Zatzal, who had a huge impact. It's Chav Zayin. So Chav Zayin is today's Chav Zayin. So today is also the yahrzeit of Rabbi Victor Miller, the Chetzadik for Kodesh V'Bracha. He was very opinionated. I wish Chaim Tzvi was here because he would for sure be able to share with us a story about Rabbi Victor Miller. Chaim Tzvi is the Chusid, Rabbi Victor Miller. Yeah. Okay. Zokt the Heilige Mishnah. They print some Torah Savig there. Yeah. Zokt the Heilige Gemara. Ad Shaloi Nimchaka HaMegillah. The Megillah had not yet been wiped out. Rashi said, Eini Shoisa. So now we have a Megillah written up. What are we going to do with it? Zok the Mishnah Megillah are Nignezes. Her Megillah is Nignezes. Where do they put it? They make Gniz on it. Very interesting. Machlokish Rashi in places. Rashi says, where is it Nignezes? Betzidei HaHeichel, at the side of the Heichel. The Chol Kisrei HaKodesh she'enon ru'uyin likrois b'hen. If you have kids you're not supposed to read, Nignozin, they're hidden. Shalo yizbazu, they shouldn't be mutal b'bezayim. Tosfos says something fascinating. Tosfos says, Tani nignazois tachas tzirai shel ha'heichel, under the hinge of the heichel. So in those days the doors were Lego doors, right? So they had a pin at the bottom and a pin at the top, and there was a socket at the bottom that the pin went into. They put it into that socket that the pin went into. So the pin from the door literally ground down and destroyed the paper. Nignazis tachas tzira shel heichel. Lama v'shula shachaka, to grind it. A little cut in Hayisham, there was a small little compartment there. V'sham amayim mishpachim, and they poured the water there too. So I'll call upon them. You see that they destroyed it. It's very interesting. It's very interesting that that's the way to dispose of Shemus is to destroy it. It was just buried, like Shemus. I thought that's what it meant. And now that you mentioned it, doesn't say buried. It says Nignazos B'sidei Hechel. I thought it meant buried, but maybe not. Yeah. So Gniza can mean above ground too, right? You just put away. Yeah. Okay. So Zok to Gemara, Achin and Nimcha Begila Amar in the Shoysa Megilas and the Knesses Umin Chasa Mispazeres Aladesh. And they just spread the flour over the base addition. And Rashi says, where was this base addition? Shehiba Azara. It was, I believe, if you were looking at the Mizbeach, your back was facing the south, and you were facing the north, and you were looking at the ramp, it was to the right of the ramp. Shehiba Azara Shesais and Shah Psule Kachakachim, Psule Emurim, Shemichitas and Lofnim Naklayim. It's a place where they used to burn the carbonas that went tame. So that's where you just spread the mincha over there. The ein megilasak sheira lahashbus b'soitah acheres. You cannot reuse it. You can't just put it back in the file and wait for the next soita. Nimchaka hamagila b'amar tameyani. What if it was already nimchaka and she just tameyani? So then amayim nishbachin, we pour out the water, as Rashi says. Even the amar tameyani beduka v'imedasi. She is beduka, and therefore umayim mamarim le'nitnu el levar es asafik, which we no longer have. And the same thing when chasam is pazeres al beis hadesh. What happens if nimcha magila ba'amru eni shaisa? What if it was nimcha magila and she didn't say tamayani? She just says, I don't want to drink. Then ma'ar naisa umashke naisa v'al. Then we force her, as Rashi says, the doma tahirahi umachmas risi susa ka'amra. Maybe she's just terrified, but in fact she's tahira. So we force her to drink. So the forcing is for her own good, to try to exonerate her and not let her be blemished because of the fact that she's afraid. Eina misapekes lishtois. What happens? Now we're going to get a play-by-play of what occurs when this woman drinks. So Eina misapekes lishtois. She doesn't even finish drinking, and the reaction is instant. Ache painea marikos. Her face turns green. The einea boltois, and her eyes pop out of her. They pop out. Vehimis malaes giden. I guess all of her veins get inflated, so it looks like she's marked with veins. The veins in her cheeks, they blow up. The nearest kamaleh giden, that makes her face look like it's full of veins. The gam besora nasa shita shanaficha. Her body also gets completely blown up, bloated. Like ropes inside her. I'm not sure, are getting veins or are getting sinews? Whatever they are, it says veins, okay? And they announce, quickly get her out of there, so that she should not make the Azara Tameh. Now, Rashi points out she was never in the Azara. She was in Shari Niknar, which has the status of Ezras Noshim. And the Gemara is going to ask, a mace is allowed in the Ezras Noshim, and a mace is allowed even in Shari Niknar. So why is it that they had this rush to get her out if there's no problem with a mace being there? Im yesh lo schus. What if she had a schus? She did mitzvahs and ma'asem tovim. So then, it would delay the reaction. It wouldn't stop it, it would delay it. Yesh schus toila shana achas. Sometimes you have a schus that will delay it for a year. Yesh schus toila beishav, yesh schus toila gimel shana. So the range of how long the reaction can be delayed is from 1 year to 3 years. That's going to be challenged in the Gemara. That's why I'm pointing it out, from 1 year to 3 years. This is why Ben Azai taught us that Chayiv Adam Lelamed is Bite Torah. A person is Mechuyev to teach his daughter Torah. Why? If she drinks, so why should you teach your daughter Torah? Because just in case your daughter becomes a Sotah, she should know, Chas in other words, she shouldn't doubt the Torah. I got away with it. She shouldn't doubt that. If you teach her that the schus is Torah, so that even if she's a Sotah one day and she drinks from the Mayim Amorim and she survives, she shouldn't look down at the Torah. She shouldn't laugh at the Torah thinking, ha, it didn't work. Because she'll know it was because of her spousum. So
Yes,
the person
yes.
is very interesting. Azai was not married. I don't know if he had daughters, but yet he was giving us a lesson in chinuch. You should teach your daughters Torah so that just in case they become Sotahs and they have schlusim, they won't mock the Torah because they'll know that the reason why they survived, at least temporarily, was because of their Torah.
Yosy, just backing up for a minute. None of an Avihu died in the Kodesh, right? So
He died
in the Kodesh, they were bringing in a sword into the Mizbech B'fnim, to the golden Mizbech, terrace. So that had to be in the Kodesh. So that had to be removed. But it doesn't say, there's no formula how to make the Kodesh tar again. If it's Metame the Kodesh.
Well, only Kalim would become Tameh, but of course, the building, Mechuber Lakarka, doesn't become Tameh at all.
So the Kalim, so that means that the Mizbeach and the Menorah,
yes, so
whatever
the Gemara discusses in Chagiga, after Yom Tov, they had to be Metaher all the Kalim and the Azorah because of all the Amaratzim that could have been Tameh that would have touched them.
But we don't see that they did that.
I guess they must have. Chaim is saying that a Malach pulled them out before they were able to be Matami. You're talking about by Nadav and Avihu. So you're saying an oil becomes Tameh? I mean the fabric. Here. Rabbi Lezer disagrees with Ben Azai's chinuch. Yeah, that's right. It was Woba. I disagree with you, Ben Azai. I have daughters. Let me tell you how I raise my daughters. The tiflus. What tiflus is, we'll see in the Gemara, but clearly he's not projecting it as a good thing. Interesting enough, today is the Yortite as well of Rabbi Hellman, who was the principal of Ishakav of Brooklyn for many, many years. So we're learning mamish this shaila of are you supposed to teach your daughters Torah. So just to round it out, are you allowed to teach girls Torah? The Chafetz Chaim says, I believe on this Gemara, he says, when was there a shaila as to whether or not teaching your daughter Torah is tiflos? That was in the olden days where there was no secular education and all a woman was ever exposed to was what she grew up with at home. But today, where there's secular education and they're exposed to the world and they're exposed to the apikourses and the tum of the world, less man the polag, we must teach our daughters Torah. Chumash, Navi, Musar, Ashkofa, Halacha. Those are things that we absolutely must teach our daughters. Otherwise, we're going to lose everything. And that's what led to Sarah Schneer. That's why she had so much support from the Gedolim. That's number one. Number two is, if you think about it, the Poskim say women have to learn the halachas that are relevant to them. So if you think about it, women have to learn the halachas that are relevant to them. Okay, that's limited. It's only Yer Chaim, Yer Deya, Chayin Shemishbat, and Even Ezer. They have to know more than most men know in order to fear Zach. A woman has to know not to be a ganem. A woman has to know how to run the kitchen. So really, there's many halachas that women have to know without having a chiv of Talmud Torah. There's a whole bunch of Torah about Birchas Torah. There's a woman mechuyev in Birchas Torah because is her chiv of Limud Torah the same chiv as a man, al tvagisa, or if it's only to know the information. I'm sorry? Yeah, but they got it from their upbringing. They got that from their upbringing. They followed along as to how things are done. So the Chafetz Chaim says the reason why they need the Torah now, the reason why they need to learn is not so much for the information that they can still get at home. If they get it at home, it's more because of the horrible other influences that have to be balanced out with Musar and Ashkof and Novi. Okay, so let's see the Gemara right here. But it's interesting that our Mishnah we literally have a machlokes about chinuch. Rabbi Shua says, "Roach isha b'kav tiflus." A woman would rather have a kav of with one kav of tiflus, meaning have a less gashmius, but have tiflus mites kav and have a lot more baru precious. Again, we're going to have to see the Gemara elaborate on these things. Who are you, Aimer? Chassid Sotah v'Rasha Arim, and the Gemara is going to explain what some of these things are, and some of these things Rashi explains over here. So Chassid Sotah v'Rasha Arim, and a sly Rasha, the Isha Purusha, and a woman who's a Purusha, Umakos Purushan, which Rashi teaches as someone makes believe like he bangs into walls because he wants to show that he's an Unavan Tznuah, because he wants to make believe like he's a orangutan of learning, he doesn't see walls, so he bangs into them, a faker. They are mixing up the world. I'm sorry? What does Mavala mean? Ruins the world. They ruin the world. Like as was in Blois Begotten. Okay, let's see the Gemara. Amar Bidu Amar Shmuel. Mishum Rab Meir. Kishayisi Lame Torah Eitzel Rabbi Akiva. When they used to learn Torah by Rabbi Akiva. And as a preface, I just want to add that the Gemara tells us that Rab Meir's shiurim were so difficult to understand that people mamish couldn't understand Rab Meir's Torah. That's how difficult it was. So here's Rab Meir talking. When I used to learn by Rabbi Akiva, Hayisi Matel Kankantoim L'Seicha Diyoy. So I guess Rab Meir was a cipher. He would put Kankantoim into the ink, and Kankantoim makes it that the ink will not get erased. He wasn't talking about writing the parsha specifically for a Sotah. He's talking about in his Sefer Torah that he wrote. The Gemara is going to ask, the Rishonim asked that. He wasn't even there with my advice. The Tosfos mentions that. Tosfos mentions that right over here, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, which is the letter in the Gemara, Teimel Rebbe, Habameir Meir Nifsaku Kfar Hamayim Amorim. Exactly like what you're bringing up. So Zok to Gemara, I used to put it in V'lo Amar Li Davar, and Rabbi Akiva had no problem with it. But Kishavasi, Eitel Rabbi Shmuel, when they came to learn by Rabbi Shmuel, Amar Li B'ni Mamalach. He asked me, what do you do? Amar Ki Lo Lavlar Ani, I'm a sefer. Amar Li, if you're a sefer, let me give you some important advice. B'ni Habazar, you need to be very careful in your work. Shamalachtecha Malecha Shemayim, you're doing the Malach of Shemayim. Shema Tachser Oisachas or Tater Oisachas. If you are not accurate in how you write things and you add a noise or miss out a noise, nimtus at the machriv es kol ha'olam kula, you're destroying the world. And Rashi gives us an example. If you write Hashem Elokeichem Emes and you miss out the last sof, the last aleph, so it says Hashem Elokeichem without the aleph, that will be a huge problem. Or if you have an extra ois, if you said instead of saying Bereshis bara Elokim, you said Bar'oi Elokim, which would indicate that there are multiple Rishuyos, that's where it could be serious. So you need to be very, very accurate. Amarti Loi, so I told him, don't worry about it. Davar Echad Yeshli, I have a special ingredient. So what in the world does his response have to do? Shmuel told him. Shmuel's talking about being accurate, and he's talking about ink. So the Gemara is going to explain it shortly. But I just want to take a step back and point out, Reb Meir learned by Rabbi Akiva, and Reb Meir learned by Rabbi Shmuel. Who did he learn by first? Rabbi Akiva, right? He went to Rabbi Akiva, and he went to Rabbi Shmuel. That's important to keep in mind, because the Gemara is going to ask a stira soon that says that he learned by Rabbi Shmuel first, and then Rabbi Akiva. That's what we're going to see. So Zok to Gemara, Amarti Loi, Davar Echad, Yeshli Shadimat Mutzechadoi, V'Kankantim Shmuel. Amrli. So he says, what do you mean? You put Kankantim into the ink? The Torah said, you have to be able to rub it out, which indicates that you cannot even write in a Sefer Torah the Parsha of Sotah with ink that cannot be rubbed out. So Zok to Gemara, so you see here that Rabbi Akiva didn't have a problem with Kankantim, but Rabbi Shmuel did have a problem with Kankantim. HaTorah Amar Umacha is Ksav Sheyuchal Imchos. So Maika Amarle, what was Rabbi Shmuel referring to when he talked about being accurate? Umaika Mahadale, and exactly what is the Kankantim? How is that a response from Rabbi Meir to what Rabbi Shmuel said? You're telling me to be concerned Rabbi Shmuel is telling Rabbi Meir to be concerned with chaseres for yaseres. Abba Baki, you can rest assured that I'm very accurate and my Torahs are perfect. Ella, I even take it a step further, Rabbi Meir said. Imagine if I have fresh ink that I just wrote and a fly goes on it and the fly could rub out the ink. So it could be missing a letter because of the fact that a fly was on it. I have a way to protect myself from that as well. If he's on the back, little thing sticking out of the daled, and then the fly rubs that off and makes it into a reish, I have a protection from that. So that's Reb Meir's response. It wasn't just a random fact. It was saying I do things to make sure that I write my Torahs accurate and they remain accurate. I'm sorry? That's right. Oh, that's what would be very relevant. I hear it. Okay. Amy, is that so? Are you telling me that first Reb Meir learned by Rabbi Akiva and then he learned by Rabbi Shmuel? But Tanya, I'm Reb Meir, when I originally learned Torah by Rabbi Shmuel, so we have two steers. A is now you see he learned by Rabbi Shmuel first, and B is here Rabbi Shmuel didn't have a problem with the kankantain. And Kishabasa is Rabbi Akiva, Ostra Alai. So for tomorrow we have a double kasha. Kasha Shimus Hashimush, who did Reb Meir learn by first, and kasha Osra Ostra. We also have a steer because in the first shtickle it was Rabbi Shmuel who said don't use kankantain, and in the second shtickle Rabbi Shmuel said use it, and Rabbi Akiva said don't use it. Look, the word Bishlam Shimus Hashimush Lekasha. He went back and forth. Meikara also lekamed Rabbi Akiva. First, he went to learn by Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was his first Rebbe. Even the Leimotzi Kam Alibay, he couldn't understand Rabbi Akiva. And if you look at Rashi, Rashi explains why Rabbi Meir couldn't understand the Torah of Rabbi Akiva. And he says, Leimotzi Lemeikam Alibay al Ikre Taimei, so your Omer al Tomei Tahar. He would say the Tomei is Tahar and show him a reason. And then he would say Tahar Tomei and show him a reason. So Rabbi Akiva would Paskin on the same side, Tomei or Torah, bring good rice to each side. So I don't know what the halacha is. You told me Tomei, Torah, what am I supposed to do? So they reference a ritva in Eruvin that speaks about Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. And he brings down, I think from a medrash, that when Moshe Rabbeinu was in Shemayim, every halacha that there was to discuss, the Rebbeinu Shalom brought him 49 rayas lehater or le'esor. In each shtickle, or 49 l'tamei or l'tar. So Moshe Rabbeinu told Hashem, like, what am I supposed to do? So the Rebbeinu Shalom told Moshe Rabbeinu, Torah is given over to the Chachamim of every generation to make a psak halacha. And there's different ways and different approaches to look at things. And therefore you should know that whatever the Chachamim ba'osidor paskin, that's the halacha of Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. So could be Rabbi Akiva was teaching on that high level, and therefore Reb Meir says this is like I don't know how to begin over here. So because of that, he left. And also lekamed Rabbi Shmuel, he went to learn by Rabbi Shmuel, the Gemara, and then he learned halachas, at least what's mutter, what's osir. But then he wanted to get more pshatim and lomdus. Hadar also lekamed Rabbi Akiva savar svara. So at least we know it's not a stira, because in fact he learned first by Rabbi Akiva, then by Rabbi Shmuel, and then he went back to Rabbi Akiva again. So at least that solves that problem. But we still have a problem. Who said kankantaim is mutter? And who said kankantaim is osir? Allah osir kasha. Is it more kasha? No, it's fair. We have a kasha. Who said what? But that's what happened. About it. Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. In his all his neschus, in his tikkun, that's like you sound. I hear. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer Rabbi Meir l'chol matilin kankantaim l'say chadiyim. You're allowed to put kankantaim in the ink of all the parshas of the Torah that don't need erasing. Chutz mi parsha Sotah. And Rashi says even in the Sefer Torah, no one's going to wipe out a Sefer Torah. You'll write a special Megillah to the Sotah. But when you're writing the parsha Sotah in the Torah, you cannot use kankantaim. That also has to be erasable. Chutz mi parsha Sotah b'vad. B'yakav b'aymer mishmoy. Chutz mi parsha Sotah shel mikdash. Not any Sefer Torah that's written anywhere that they're never going to use, but the Sefer Torah that they used in the base of Mikdash, Shall call Sotah v'Sotah. So if Yaakov says it's referring to not the Sefer Torah, it's referring to the personal klaf that was written for each Sotah. That's where you cannot use ink that will not erase. But in a regular Sefer Torah that we learn from, there you could. What's the difference between Rabbi Yaakov and the first pshat? So obviously the difference is can you use a regular Sefer Torah that's written to wipe it out and use that for the Sotah? Can you use a regular Sefer Torah? What would that be telling you? Why would you be able to use a regular Sefer Torah and wipe out one of its parshas? And why wouldn't you? Oh, Bahani Tanoi, Kani Tanoi. A time says it's telling whether or not writing the parsha of the Sotah has to be done lishma, for her special. Because a regular Sefer Torah, you're not writing it for her, you're writing it for a Sefer Torah. The Tanya we learned, Ein Megillasik Sheir Lahashkas Basotah Acheres. You cannot use what you wrote for one Sotah for another Sotah, like we learned in our Mishnah. I'm sorry? Yeah, but that's still, you would have written that in a special class. I'm sorry? Why not? Sure it has it. The instructions are in there. It's part of the parsha, yeah. Rabacha by Yosy Amar Megillasik Sheir Lahashkas Basotah Acheres. So Zok Gemara, no, you don't have a right. Because the machlokes there is not if you can use a Sefer Torah or you have to write special for the Sotah. The question is, if you have something that was written specifically for Sotah A, can you use it for Sotah B? So Amar Papa Dilma Loyi Atkan like Amar Tanakama Hasam. Why did the Tanakama say that you can't use the Sotah, the klaf from one Sotah for another Sotah? Elakiven the intik l'shum rochel lehadr mintika l'shum leya. A Sefer Torah is written stomach, but if you wrote the klaf specifically for Rachel, it's already designated something specific that you can no longer use for somebody else. Abal Torah, the stomach siva, the Torah was written not for any Sotah, it was written for the Torah, so it's neutral. Maybe hachanami de machkina. So maybe you can't have that it was written for somebody else, but it didn't have to be written for this particular Sotah. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, I can tell you the other way. It's not a raya either. Where did Rav Achav say that you could use the Megillah of one Sotah for another Sotah? At least when this klaf was written, it was written for a Sotah. The Torah wasn't written for any Sotah. Maybe hechanami deloy machkina. So in other words, the machlok is as to whether or not you can use the parsha of Sotah in a Sefer Torah or not is completely independent and not connected with the shaila as to whether or not you can use the Megillah of one Sotah to service another Sotah. Zok Gemara, Frek Gemara shaila. Rav Acha bar Yosy, who said you could use from one to the next. Lastly, because of Lagarish Ishtoy, V'nimlach. What if someone writes a get for his wife, and after he writes it, he changes his mind, he doesn't want to use it anymore. And then Motzai ben Irai, he found someone from his city, because in the get it says what city he's from. And he told his friend, it costs $500 to get a rabbi to write up a get. I have a perfect get. My name is the same as yours. Your wife's name is the same. So use it. The halacha is pasal lagarish boy. It's pasal. So if it's pasal over there, why is it kosher by the Sotah? Why is it kosher by the Sotah? Zok to Gemara, and why do we say it's pasal? Rashi the dashin on the law lishma. It says v'chas of law lishma. You say v'chas of law say it crazes. But hachanami, when it talks about the Sotah, the Torah says v'asal law kain. So it has to be specific for her. So how could you say otherwise? The Gemara Amri Hasam the Kasav law Amar Rachmana. The Inon Ksiva Lishma. And the Ksiva wasn't Lishma. Hachanami V'asala. I hear it says V'asala as well. But from my Asiyah Mechika. It doesn't have to be written for this specific woman, but it has to be washed out with this for this specific woman. So maybe any klaf would be good, but the Asiyah that has to be Lishma is the action of pouring the water over it and wiping it out. Gewaltig. No. Oh, so Tosha speaks about that. Tosha speaks about it. So it says no. It's speaking where you just wrote it, and it's still wet. But Tosha actually speaks about the mitzias of how it worked. There's some other issues, but that's how Tosha resolves that. There's nothing more about the enemies of lishto is achapanel. Mani Rab Shimon. This has to be going according to Rab Shimon. The Omar Makar Vesman Chasa ve'achach Mashke. Because only according to Rab Shimon could you say there's an instant reaction. The Kamad Lakav Min Chasa Lebat Kolmaya. According to Rab Shimon, according to everybody, the mayim doesn't work until the mincha is brought. So if you hold the mincha is brought before, so then immediately when she starts drinking, it'll impact her. But if the mincha is brought after, like the Tanakama, so you wouldn't say as soon as she drinks, she starts reacting. The reaction wouldn't start until the next step, until they brought the mincha. The chsiv, minchas zikaron maskeres of it. Zok to Gemara, if you're saying that the Mishnah has to be going according to Reb Shimon, well, let's look at the next halacha in the Mishnah, which seems not to be able to stem with Reb Shimon. Ema Seifa, yesh lo schus hoyse toilela. That's also Rabbanon. Here, Reb Shimon Amar ein schus toilela b'mayim hamarim. We learned earlier in the Masechta that according to Reb Shimon, the schus never helps because then it's going to be moitzi laz on the water. Someone who is found to be not guilty will never have that exoneration. Amar Reb Chisda, and also women won't be afraid. It won't be deterred in the first place. That's what Reb Shimon said. So this can't be going according to Reb Shimon. Amar Reb Chisda, you're right. Hamani Reb Akiva. This is a third sheet of Reb Akiva. The Amar Makraves ben Chasa v'achach mashka. He agreed, as we learned yesterday. Reb Akiva agreed that the order is first you bring the mincha, then she drinks. But when it comes to schus toilala, savala Rabbanon, he disagrees with Reb Shimon there. And he holds like the Rabbanon that a schus is toilala, and that's who our mission is going like. The Heimar might get her out. Why do they need to get her out? My time at the Dilma Mesa. Remember the mess also b'machin levia. Are you telling me that the mess is also b'machin levia? Machin levia is all of Harabayis up until the inside of Shar Nikna. Are you going to tell me a mess can't be there? But Tanya we learned Tamei mes mutter likones lemachin levia. Not only that, but Tamei mes not just someone who became Tamei from coming into contact with a mace. A dead body is allowed in the Machin Leviyah. How do you know that? Because Moshe Rabbeinu's neighborhood in the Midbar was Machin Leviyah. And Shenemar V'igach Moshe is Atzmus Yosef Imai b'mechitzosai. The Atzmus Yosef was a mace. He was kept together with Moshe. Abaye, we're not concerned about a mace. We're worried about Abaye Shematifris Nida. Because of the trauma to her, she'll become a Nida. And Tumah Hayotzim in Aguf, like Ziva Nida, those are also in the Machin Leviyah. Correct, Gemara, are you telling me, remember to be a Susa Marpi? Are you telling me that this scare loosens her up and will prompt, will stimulate flow of Nida? Look, we're in. And you see it in the Megillah. When Esther heard about the danger that Clarisol was in, she was piercing Nida. The Vamar Rabsha piercing Nida. Correct, Gemara, we have a different halacha. The halacha is that even if someone has a zmana vest, and you can assume that she saw dam, for instance, the zmana vest passed and you didn't check, so you normally have to assume there was damin. However, if she was in a mokem charada, like for instance hiding from the Nazis in a bunker, there we would say that maybe she's not tamei because when a woman is in fear, it actually stops her from seeing dam nida. Zok Gemara, pachta tzomis biasusa marpi. You're right. If she's in a long set of fear, she's hiding away from the Nazis, she's there for months. That entire period where she's in fear, she will not see dam nida. But if someone is suddenly faced with a shocking trauma, that's already something that would cause the need to flow. Biasusa marpi. Zok Gemara, yesh lo schus ha'isa toila. Mani masnisin. Who is our Mishnah that says the range is 1 to 3 years? Lo Rabbi Yosef ben Chanan, v'lo Rabbi Elazar ben Yitzchak, ish kfar doraim, v'lo Rabbi Shmuel. Neither of the three sheets that we're about to quote hold it's 1 to 3 years. The Tanya, im yesh lo schus toila lo shloisha chadashim. The first sheet is only 3 months. Why 3 months? Kedei hakoros uber divrei Rabbi Yossi ben Chanan. Why 3 months? So Rashi says something interesting that Tosfos argues with. Rashi says, "Kedei akaris over the dorish the niksav and nizra zara." Right? If she's clean, it's for niksav and nizra zara. So Zok Rashi, the Dosh from Nixai, they schus kedev in Israel Zara, Kishir, shall ober nicker b'muberes. So we learned that she'll be naki even if she has a schus for 3 months. Tosfos doesn't like that shot at all. Tosfos says something much simpler. Tosfos says that the reason why it's 3 months, because in 3 months we'll know if she's pregnant. If she's pregnant, then we know she was Mazana. So Memela, it's clear that she was Mazana already. Anyway, so let's see the second shita. So the first shita is 3 months, not consistent with our Mishnah. Rabbi Elazar ben Yitzchak, it's Kfar Darim, Amar Tes Chadashim, 9 months, not either consistent with our Mishnah. Shenemer v'nixer v'nizra zara. It says v'nixer v'nizra zara by Sotah. Ulahal noimer. It says zera yavdenu yusupar. He'll have a zera and it'll make him talk and say shvach to the Rebbeinu Shalom that he had a child. So zera haroy l'saper. It's only if the child is born already, because at that point haroy l'saper lichyois v'lovil desiper shvach shalmakim. When are we mishabech? When the baby's born. The Maharsha brings down a different shita. Haroy l'saper means until the child is old enough to speak, which would be even longer. Rabbi Shmuel Omer, shnei masach chodesh, it's 12 months. After a Belshazzar, after Nebuchadnezzar saw in a dream that he was going to be in big trouble, Daniel gave him advice as to what he should do, and he told him, you're going to have to leave civilization and hang out with the animals and the chayas in the forest for a period of time, and then Lehen Malka, if to the king, Milki Yashber, my words are acceptable, if you're going to listen to me, Milki Yishber Alecha, V'chitecha B'tzedaka Proik, with tzedakah you could redeem your averis, V'visicha B'mechen Onin, and your averis by showing kindness to poor people, Hein Tehava, Archa L'Shalvasich. They'll extend some of your freedom. Uchsiv Kaloi Mata al Nebuchadnezzar Malka, and then Uksiv Liktsas Yachin Treyasa. So that's how we know 12 months. So we'll go back to this sheet of Rabbi Shmuel tomorrow, but the cash is ultimately going to be, no one says 3 years. You have 3 months, you have 9 months, or you have a year. No one says 3 years. So who's our Mishnah going like? The Mashal doesn't say that's part of the argument. The Mashal asks a kasha from a different Gemara. That's not his shita. No, that's not. I didn't mean to say that the Mashal says that's the shita of this Tana. He has the kasha. He says there's another Tana somewhere else who ties it differently and would argue on this Tana. Okay, let's stop here and Mitchell will be mamshach tomorrow.